Imagine pulling a smartphone out of your pocket in 2026 and realizing something feels fundamentally different. Not just the look or the animations, but the philosophy behind it. No constant background tracking. No mysterious system processes phoning home. No ads baked into the operating system. No sense that your personal data is the real product. This is the promise that Ubuntu Touch represents in 2026. A privacy-first Linux phone operating system that openly challenges the Android and iOS duopoly, not by copying them, but by deliberately refusing to become them. Ubuntu Touch began life as an ambitious idea from Canonical, the company behind Ubuntu Linux, but after Canonical stepped away, it was kept alive and evolved by the UBports community. Fast forward to 2026, and Ubuntu Touch is no longer just a curiosity for Linux enthusiasts. It has matured into a surprisingly capable mobile operating system with a clear identity, a real Linux system in your pocket, designed around user control, transparency, and long-term sustainability rather than data extraction and planned obsolescence. To understand why Ubuntu Touch matters in 2026, you first have to look at the state of smartphones today. Android dominates globally, but it is deeply tied to Google services. Even so-called de-Googled Android variants often rely on compatibility layers that still mimic Google APIs. iOS, on the other hand, offers tight privacy controls but locks users into Apple's ecosystem hardware and rules. Both platforms have become heavier over time, demanding more powerful hardware just to feel smooth, while software support is often artificially limited by manufacturers. This is the environment in which Ubuntu Touch positions itself as an alternative. Not for everyone, but for people who want something fundamentally different. Ubuntu Touch in 2026 is built on Ubuntu Linux at its core, using modern Ubuntu LTS bases maintained by the UBports project. This means it inherits many of the strengths Linux users already trust on desktops and servers: a clear package management system, predictable updates, and a strong separation between the operating system and user data. Unlike Android, which is a complex stack of Linux kernel plus Java frameworks and proprietary services, Ubuntu Touch feels closer to a traditional Linux system, adapted intelligently for touchscreens. One of the first things users notice when they boot into Ubuntu Touch is the interface. It does not try to imitate Android or iOS. Instead, it uses a gesture-driven design that emphasizes edge swipes and fluid transitions. In 2026, this interface feels refined and confident, not experimental. Swiping from the left edge reveals the launcher, swiping from the right switches apps, and swiping from the top controls system settings. It's an interface that rewards muscle memory and reduces clutter, and over time it can feel faster than tapping buttons or navigating nested menus. But the real story of Ubuntu Touch is not just how it looks, it's how it treats you as a user. Privacy in Ubuntu Touch is not a marketing checkbox, it is baked into the design. There is no centralized account required to use the system. You don't need to sign in just to activate your phone. There is no default App Store account tracking your downloads across devices. The Open Store, which is the main app repository for Ubuntu Touch, does not require personal information to browse or install applications. In a world where app stores increasingly feel like surveillance hubs, this alone is a radical difference. In 2026, Ubuntu Touch also benefits from a more mature permission system. Apps are containerized using a confinement model that limits what each app can access. Applications must explicitly request access to things like your camera, microphone, location, or files, and you can see and control those permissions clearly. Because Ubuntu Touch apps are often open source, you can even inspect what they are doing if you have the technical knowledge. This level of transparency is rare in mobile ecosystems today. Another key pillar of Ubuntu Touch in 2026 is Convergence, an idea Canonical once pushed heavily and which the community has quietly continued to refine. Convergence means that when you connect your phone to a monitor, keyboard, and mouse, the interface can adapt into a desktop-like experience. In 2026, this feature is no longer just a demo. On supported devices, Ubuntu Touch can realistically serve as a lightweight desktop for web browsing, document editing, and basic productivity tasks. It will not replace a high-end workstation, but for many users, it can replace a second device entirely. This convergence story becomes even more compelling when you remember that Ubuntu Touch is Linux. That means access to traditional Linux applications through containerized systems like Libertine. In 2026, running desktop Linux apps on Ubuntu Touch is more stable and practical than it was in the early days. You can run applications like GIMP, LibreOffice, or even development tools, albeit with some limitations depending on hardware. For developers, system administrators, and Linux power users, this opens up possibilities that Android simply does not offer in the same way. Of course, the biggest question people ask is whether Ubuntu Touch can realistically replace Android in daily life. The honest answer in 2026 is that it depends on who you are and what you expect from your phone. Ubuntu Touch does not aim to replicate the Android app ecosystem. There is no native support for Google Play services, and most Android apps do not run out of the box. However, there has been progress. Projects like Waydroid allow some devices to run Android applications inside a container. In 2026, Waydroid integration on Ubuntu Touch is better than before, offering access to essential apps for users who need them while still keeping Android contained and separated from the core system. That said, relying on Android apps is not the ideal Ubuntu Touch experience. The real strength of the platform lies in native applications built using Qt and other Linux technologies. In 2026, the Open Store has grown significantly. You'll find solid clients for messaging platforms, email, calendars, music players, podcast apps, navigation tools, and even some social media clients. Are there gaps? Absolutely. If your daily workflow depends on a specific proprietary Android or iOS app, Ubuntu Touch may still feel limiting. But if you prioritize web standards, open protocols, and privacy-respecting services, Ubuntu Touch covers more ground than many expect. Hardware support is another critical factor. Ubuntu Touch does not run on every phone. In 2026, officially supported devices include models from companies like Fairphone, certain OnePlus devices, and a range of community-ported phones. The Fairphone partnership is particularly important because it aligns perfectly with Ubuntu Touch's philosophy. Fairphone devices emphasize repairability, ethical sourcing, and long-term software support. Pairing Fairphone hardware with Ubuntu Touch software creates a smartphone that can realistically last many years, both physically and digitally. This long-term support aspect is where Ubuntu Touch truly shines compared to Android. Most Android phones receive major updates for only a few years, often because manufacturers move on to new models. Ubuntu Touch, being community-driven and hardware-agnostic to some extent, can keep devices alive long after their Android support ends. In 2026, there are users running Ubuntu Touch on phones that would be considered obsolete in the Android world. Yet they receive security updates and system improvements regularly. Security is another area where Ubuntu Touch offers a different perspective. Because it is built on Ubuntu Linux, it benefits from well-established security practices, timely patches, and a clear update process. Updates are delivered over the air, and because the system uses read-only root file systems with atomic updates, it is more resilient against certain types of system corruption. While no system is immune to vulnerabilities, the transparency of Ubuntu Touch means issues can be identified and fixed in the open, without waiting for a corporate decision. In terms of performance, Ubuntu Touch in 2026 feels lighter than most Android builds. Without layers of proprietary services running in the background, the system can feel surprisingly smooth even on mid-range hardware. Battery life is often competitive, especially when users take advantage of Linux-style power management and avoid battery-hungry proprietary apps. This efficiency further reinforces the idea that modern smartphones do not need to be as resource-intensive as they have become. There is also a cultural aspect to Ubuntu Touch that cannot be ignored. Using it feels like joining a community rather than a product ecosystem. Users participate in forums, report bugs, contribute translations, and sometimes even help maintain device ports. In 2026, this sense of shared ownership is rare in consumer technology. For many users, it creates a deeper connection to their device and a greater appreciation for how it works. Comparisons with other Linux-based mobile systems are inevitable. Projects like Postmarketos, Plasma Mobile, and Sailfish OS all target similar audiences. Ubuntu Touch stands out because of its relative polish, its stable base, and its focus on usability over experimentation. Postmarketos, for example, is incredibly flexible and powerful, but often feels more like a developer platform. Plasma Mobile offers deep integration with the KDE ecosystem, but can be heavier on resources. Sailfish OS has commercial backing, but includes proprietary components. Ubuntu Touch in 2026 occupies a middle ground, offering a balance of openness, usability, and stability. So, can Ubuntu Touch replace Android? For the average mainstream user who lives inside social media apps, mobile games, and proprietary services, the answer is probably no, at least not yet. Android's app ecosystem and hardware variety remain unmatched. But for a growing group of users who value privacy, control, longevity, and openness, Ubuntu Touch is not just a replacement, it is an upgrade in philosophy. In 2026, smartphones are no longer just communication tools. They are identity hubs, wallets, health trackers, and constant companions. The question is not whether Ubuntu Touch can do everything Android does, but whether we really want our phones to work the way Android and iOS currently do. Ubuntu Touch offers a glimpse of an alternative future, one where your phone serves you, not the other way around. This future is not perfect, and Ubuntu Touch does not pretend it is. There are trade-offs, compromises, and learning curves. But there is also freedom, transparency, and a refreshing sense that technology can still be shaped by communities rather than corporations. In a world increasingly dominated by closed ecosystems and opaque algorithms, Ubuntu Touch in 2026 stands as a reminder that another path is possible, and for some users, that path is not just viable, it is deeply rewarding.